insulating our house, I guess. I don't know.
All right, I'm seeing 3:01 on the,
The master clock?
Correct. The internet.
okay, we'll call the meeting to order. We have a quorum. There are 3 of us here of 5. That constitute a quorum. Our other members are in travel status for the holidays. Good for them. So let's jump right in to the approval of the November meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve.
And
Second.
any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. New business, HRA as property owner and/or low-income housing tax credit applicant for Birchwood Apartments.
Yes, sorry, Chair, just one moment, I'm making a note here. You said that we are live now, so the recording is live?
I believe we should be.
Okay.
I don't have confirmation of that, but
Just in case, I'm just taking a couple notes.
someone said April was going to turn it on at 3
Correct.
o'clock. so-
Perfect, okay. I will trust the process.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So I wanted to talk to the board just briefly about an update on some conversations I've had with Minnesota Housing, some other stakeholders, and some other partners, Minnesota Housing Partnership, among others, generally trying to discern how communities like Cook County, and of course, particularly Cook County, can score well enough for some of the resources that exist. Historically, we just have not been competitive, and this is not a surprise per se to me. Duluth has a difficult enough time getting tax credit projects because of the math. So just a quick reasoning why. The costs are higher, the incomes are lower than if you were to go to Rochester or the Metro or something. So when they're scoring projects, there's quite a process and a scoring worksheet, but the short answer, or the short version is the incentives in the scoring matrix has a tough time dealing with our incomes versus the cost of projects. And if their money could go further, for example, or build more units and get more people housed, it makes sense to do that. So it's not to say that the state doesn't try, and they do try, to spread the tax credit awards out geographically, but the end result is that I actually don't think there is a tax credit project in Cook County. I have not found one. And in part, it's because, of course, there hasn't been an entity that has actively sought to do that. I'm assuming that's one of the driving factors. The other reason is because it's difficult to score. So that's the backdrop. I have been talking with, like I said, those parties I mentioned to try to figure out how could we improve that, what are the tweaks we can make, what kind of applications we can make. And for 2 primary reasons. One, I want to make sure that if we did, as a community, whether it's the HRA or we find another developer to do this, that's my preference is the latter, that we know how to make a competitive application and we know what size it needs to be. That's one of the biggest factors is I don't think that Cook County or Grand Marais needs a 60-unit, extremely subsidized project. It's too big to absorb. The servicing of that would be very difficult to staff. That's one of the biggest problems. Oh, go ahead.
What the subsidized project means the rents are also subsidized then, right?
Correct.
So we don't have that much need for that low of income for 60 units. That's
Potentially county-wide, but that's a huge geographical area.
yeah.
So
Okay.
exactly, Chair. So I'm trying to figure out what is the scale that would be more appropriate to our community, and how could we make that a compelling enough project to get funded. Oh, go ahead.
Just
Commissioner.
a little bit of background for me. Can you just explain a little bit how the tax credit incentives work? Are those incentives for the developers, or is that just a tax credits for people that are for the renters?
Sure. I'm trying to make this as succinct as possible. Tax credits are complicated. The tax credit is a federal program, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, and through the state of Minnesota, it is managed by a Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. Okay. So there's an allocation that HUD gives each state, and then different states have different ways of managing it. But in short, Minnesota Housing gets that allocation, and then they host what's called a consolidated or super RFP process. Okay. It's a competitive process statewide for projects, and they have in their guidelines for the program they've designed for this RFP, different categories of priorities. And they also have prioritization or the desire mandates to spread this around in both rural and then metro-centric Minnesota. So one of the big challenges, again, in rural communities like ours is the cost of construction is high and often higher here, and our median incomes are just lower by virtue of the job centers that we have here.
And are the funds used provided as a grant to offset part of the cost of construction and so forth?
Yeah, so this might be helpful for context. The LIHTC, Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Project or Program, is responsible for roughly 92% of all affordable housing in the country. That's deeply subsidized.
Okay.
So the rents, like to be competitive, the median rent has to be around 50% AMI or less. And to actually be competitive, it has to include things like housing for those experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, folks with disabilities, so units that are accommodating folks with disabilities. And then there are other sorts of tiers, preservation projects, senior projects. So
Okay.
there's kind of different pockets. And so I was trying to ascertain what are the different categories we can check that would make it competitive, right?
I understand.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Again, tax credits could be a whole meeting. We could talk about those. But what I learned in the short version is that there is a chance we could be competitive if we find the right developer. I think finding a developer to do that here will be fairly difficult. And so this isn't new business in the sense that I'm trying to get a motion. I just want to bring this to the board's attention generally. If there is an appetite to step back, again, my desire would be to try to engage and bring a developer to the community who would do this, and we would partner with them to do it. That's just a better leverage of our time and resources. It may be the case that we can't. I've talked with several. The numbers are tough, as we know here, period. These projects are even more difficult and complicated. And often companies even developers will hire a contractor who specializes in tax credit applications because they're so complicated. And it's this very specific type of financing. So all of that's to say, I started this quest with the lens of thinking, how do we fix and keep Birchwood Apartments? I've contacted and had conversations with the owners a couple of times now. They're interested in selling. We all have probably heard and are aware of the challenge that apartments presents, especially in the condition they're in. So I think as a community, we have a vested interest in saving 24 affordable housing units, because once they go away, they go away. So I'm in talks with a couple of developers about looking at a preservation project there, which is a certain type of tax credit project. And it would essentially fund the acquisition and then rehabilitation of those 24 units. That's the hope here. And there is a party who's interested, and so we're waiting for some numbers and basically the pro formas from the current owners on the building. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. Generally, I'm trying to bring in these partners to help salvage it as a preservation project, but also just as a larger conversation about tax credit projects in this community. And in part, and there's just kind of a highlight here, this next year could be a big year for housing resources at the state because of the surplus. Mm-hmm. And so I've been encouraged to look into this and figure out if there's a way to make it make sense for the community. So I just want to give that sort of background and update. Any questions about all of that? Any tax credit questions? I mean, how much time do we have?
I would just back you up with telling you that when I was working with One Roof on our 2 projects that they did here in Cook County, I asked them about this, and they said exactly what you said, that and they've done low-income housing tax credit projects in Duluth. They're familiar with the program and how it works, and Jeff and Julie both told me that it wasn't a program that was a good fit for us, so.
I had the fortune of working on several with them in Duluth. And so they're getting to know the ropes, and there are several who could be interested. It's, again, we have to answer the questions about scale and what kind of project it would need to be, how many units, that sort of thing.
And maybe just briefly following up on that, we do have a meeting tomorrow afternoon with an aide to the governor.
Isn't that next week?
I don't know, I think it's tomorrow, but we'll see.
Glad you brought it up.
Anyway,
Yes, sorry.
Judy Erickson has arranged a meeting for us to meet with this person in the governor's office who is the aide to the governor on housing policy. And we had a little pre-planning meeting earlier today to talk about what our message is, and it is precisely that the programs that exist, there's only one program that works for us, the way the current criteria are written. And we know that there are other rural counties who experience the same difficulties and inability to apply for those funds. So we'll see if we can, in light of the surplus, if they can maybe write some rules that are more friendly to the rest of the state. That doesn't fit, they only fit in big cities with large populations. And that doesn't serve a lot of us. So stay tuned for that. It's the beginning of the conversation. We'll see what happens by the end of the session. But
One more note, just that you reminded me of that I think is helpful to know. We're struggling to get what we would call market rate projects done in this community. Chris, you're working on one right now. The reason I bring it up is because in order for these projects, tax credit projects, to work, the tax credit program itself, and it comes usually, Minnesota Housing has a different package. Like they have mortgage products. In other words, they have sort of a suite of things that they can do for each project. They cover, the program covers over 80% of the project costs. So the reason I say that is to say, without like almost the whole thing being quote unquote free money, there's no way that it can be built. So that's part of the reason that the last year I believe that it was oversubscribed 3-1 for applications versus funding. So one of the reasons we're hopeful this year is, even if we can bump that up 2 to 3, that's pretty significant. And maybe there's a chance to spread that love, so to speak, out to the far communities of Minnesota.
One more question on it's a lot of moving pieces on the Birchwood Apartments project. Do we have a sense of, trying to get a sense of the urgency? Are the current owners close to a decision to sell, or what's the timeline on their end? How much time do we have to put together an alternative or a proposal for getting grant funding or getting tax credit financing for the renovation and rehabilitation of the property?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. They are open to selling, and they would like to. The primary or the principal partner of that project has passed away, and so the folks that are left they're out of state or distant from here, from Grand Marais, where the property is. So they want to sell. It's a little complicated because it's a USDA rural development project, which just has very specific steps on how you would go about transferring the property. So not only is it the tax credit program that you'd be dealing with, it's also the rural development program. So I think that they would be ready as soon as that process could be followed through on, but we're waiting on some documentation from them, and my communication with the owner is she has been out of town traveling for the holidays, so we're waiting on that. So it really is contingent on when we can get the materials we need to assess. The urgency, the building is, some units are better than others, but there's significant needs in the structure, and we just want to keep them from not housing people.
They're patient enough to wait for us to get put together a proposal before they're unlikely to sell before we have an opportunity to present an offer.
Yes, they don't really have a choice, frankly. There's a mortgage, a 50-year mortgage on the property in the rural development program that requires the affordability, and they can't just turn that off.
Okay.
So there's a complicated process they have to follow. So whether it's us doing something about it or we have a developer to do matchmaking, they're very open to us helping with that.
Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome.
So about whether or not it's sold to the HRA, would it be such a bad thing if it was possible that somebody else offered to buy it? I mean, they can't just necessarily kick people out that are under lease agreement, right? You can't just go in and somebody buying it can't just give people the boot. That's not how those lease terms work. So how bad would it be if somebody else bought it?
Commissioner, if you just mean on like an open market transaction?
Right.
Yes.
That's why, I guess, to clarify, that's why I'm wondering about the urgency question. Like, if it's not open market, then is there necessarily the urgency other than the condition?
Oh, sure. Good question, Commissioner. So two-part answer. One is the urgency is because the condition, like you said.
Right.
That's the urgency to try to get it preserved or rehabbed, right?
Sure.
So let's just put the program on the side for a second. Whatever tools we have to help save it, that's what we would want to figure out as quickly as possible.
Yep.
So I'm going to park that. The other urgency is because there may be significant increase in resources available this year at the state.
Right.
So I'm not trying to say that it has to be figured out even this year necessarily, but I really want to start the conversation with folks and get them interested. Typically, for tax credit projects, it takes 2-3 times of applying for a specific project to get funded. So I just want to start getting this on radars while the resources get allocated, when the state decides how they want to, when they pass it. They will pass a bill, and when they do, how they decide to allocate funds. So
Sure.
the urgency is more around the availability to actually get this done than it is like the seller wanting to sell now. And they couldn't just sell it, like if the chair said, I want to buy Birchwood Apartments, they would say, great, you have to work with the Rural Development Office, and then there'd be a whole process to go through, which from my understanding is quite complicated, and Mary would not want to do it.
Sure.
Yeah, and that whole conversation at the legislature about the surplus and making available new one-time money for housing projects, the legislature has to act, then the agency has to implement. But the more ready we are with projects close to the finish line to submit, the more likely we can get in the queue. So, but it's also very interesting not knowing what their implementation plan is going to be, what the calendar is going to look like, what the dollar amounts, the criteria, all the balls are up in the air. We have to keep trying to see a way for all the projects that we want to do.
This type of project is a multi-year endeavor, and so I'm bringing it up early because it takes a long time. I wish it didn't, but it's just how these types of funding mechanisms work. So I'm trying to get ahead of it insofar as we can to get on the radar, to start investigating the best route to go. So I'm hopeful, if it seems like the pipeline is being created and there's a path, we're ready to go.
Yeah, hurry up and wait.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I mean, we're talking about state and federal and local governments working on it, so it's fun. Yeah. Any other questions about this?
Yes, did you receive, I know you were looking for them, did you receive contractor proposals? So you have like an order of magnitude for the rehabilitation costs for that?
I wasn't looking for them directly. The property manager was. They had a difficult time, as I had mentioned to you before, Commissioner, hearing back from contractors. They had a couple, I think one that you had mentioned, and then another one that I had mentioned to them. They did get them to come up and take a look. The cost that the estimate they received was a lot higher than they anticipated, unsurprisingly. And so I think at this point, I mean, they've had a couple of services in that building trying to do some emergency maintenance, if you will. I think they're trying to understand the order of operations. If, they have to fix the water before they fix the electrical, before they fix the sheetrock, et cetera. So I think they're getting their arms around what's the best way to actually go about it, because it's significant. And plus, they don't want to displace tenants. So there's a sort of attrition part of this, moving tenants from one to one vacant. And they have, my understanding, last I talked with them, there's some vacancy at the Grand Marais Apartments that they also manage, and they were thinking about using a couple of those while they work on units. I haven't had a direct update from NIDA in a couple of weeks, though, so it's a good question. That's all I know.
No, that's,
Well, thank you for your work on that. It is an essential asset to the community for those people residing there, and it's good that you're here to help.
I hope. I mean, it's
Well,
really...
at least to know how to begin to try to help.
It's quite a process, yeah. Yeah, that's a very ambiguous path, but...
Okay. All right, anything else there on tax credits or Birchwood? Then we'll take a look at the financials. Jason has sent that to us in the email, right? It was attached
Correct, yep.
to the agenda. It looks like we're on track to carry forward a little bit of a balance into next year.
just a quick couple notes, if I may, Chair, about it. In part, there's a little bit bigger balance than anticipated because we haven't been billed yet for some attorney consultation and for Ellers as of yet. I don't anticipate those will be significant, but there will be some. Of course, we have that allocated or set aside under professional services, so that's to be expected. The other thing is, which I think we're all quickly learning, if we didn't already know, these things take a lot of time and sometimes take longer than anticipated. So the hopeful allocation of funds for 2022, we're still going to need to use them, but it's just taking longer to get to the place where we use them. So for other professional services like drafting agreements and deeds, et cetera, that'll just happen in 23 instead. Otherwise, there shouldn't be anything outlandish on there that the board hasn't seen. The one note that I did want to make, actually two quick things. One is I'm going to be squaring with the county. They do their sort of annual audits and produce in January to look back. So I'm working with a county auditor on that so we can double check all of our figures and such. And then the other thing is the survey costs. I communicated with you about this just to point out to the board. There was a miscommunication with North Shore Title and North Shore Land Surveying Company, excuse me. And the way that they had on their bid or estimate described the services was misread and misunderstood. So it was basically $3,400 for the boundary survey, and then upgrade to an Alta survey was $3,600. And I presumed that $3,600 was the total amount, but it was per line item. So
added together.
Added together, so that's why the survey cost is higher. Obviously a surprise, nevertheless, half as much as the other quote that we got. So it's done, we have it. Yeah, but I wanted to explain why that's higher than I anticipated.
So regarding the overall budget, you're saying for professional services carrying into the next year, the budget for 2022, you've earmarked things that you would have liked to spend to get some of these balls rolling?
Not necessarily. Commissioner, I wanted to make a comment that part of the reason that our budget is we have a little more rolling over than I suspected is what was presumed or set aside to be used for that hasn't been used yet because we're waiting to incur those costs until we're at the stage in those projects to do so. Sure. The budget that's laid out or that was proposed is sort of a obviously template allocation, and the costs come in where the costs come in. If we have I think a contingency of about 10% to accommodate that too. So if it comes to, we have the 23 budget projection or allocation was additional funds for those services, and if we don't use them for that, fantastic, we can redistribute them in other things. That's the hope. I'd love to have extra professional services money to put into projects. That would be great. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
It's not a situation of if we don't use it, we lose it.
No.
Yep.
No, it'll roll with us into the next year, so grateful to the county for that.
Yes, very much. Any other questions about the math? Okay.
Okay, then. Moving right along to the director's report.
Yes. As you can see, there are a litany of things. I'm going to try to be succinct. I met with, the school district approved a resolution to authorize the superintendent to negotiate directly with the HRA for the property. I have subsequently met with both Mr. Lindholm and Yorkie, because the county's involved with some of the conversations too. And we are talking about what would make sense. I have sent after our conversation, I have sent a term sheet to the school district to consider, and I think we have a good working draft. So again, this is for the property on the north side of the Gunflint, adjacent to the EDA park. And so we're just right now trying to figure out what the school board is going to want to see and what's the most appropriate way to proceed with this type of project, because no one wants to spend a lot of money without assurances, and I don't want the HRA to be in a position of putting, for example, infrastructure into something unless we have folks interested in actually building. And funding partners they unsurprisingly feel the same way. So I have some builders sort of lined up who are interested in doing some things there. And so we just, once if we have, basically, once we have rights to the property, some sort of site control, then we can have some earnest conversations with these builders about doing things like site planning and landscape assessing and figuring out where the wetland delineation, all of those things. But it looks promising, and I think, I'm hopeful that we could, in theory, we could start something there in '23 sometime, maybe fall, but we'll see. That's my objective. Again, these things take time, so. Any questions about that? Okay. So, as you all know, I've been working with One Roof Community Housing on 2 projects, basically expansions of their Lutsen and Grand Marais sites. I wanted to inform the board. I had a very unfortunate meeting with them a week and a half ago or so, right when I got back from vacation. It was a good, sobering return to reality. We were waiting on some cost projections or estimates from contractors for both of those projects, but in particular for the one in Lutsen. We had an application, as you know, submitted to the Lloyd K. Johnson Foundation for technical assistance. I had to pull that application, and the foundation was disappointed to hear it. They were excited about the project because the costs that One Roof received were incredible, $400,000 a unit, which is mathematically impossible to build. And especially because the whole intent of both of those projects was to create more of a workforce housing product. So that only works if you're getting, $2,800 a unit or something exorbitant. Maybe even then it's not worth doing. So
In rent.
Yeah, in rent. Yeah, right. Yeah. So the One Roof, as you all know, had an interesting round 1 of their projects in Cook County, and their board feels like, this is at least their second, I think their third look at trying to do something here, and they've decided that it just doesn't make sense for them to continue to try to do that. So I would suspect that they'll probably try to dispose of the property because they just have holding costs right now. And as much as we're all disappointed, and I can tell you that they were very unhappy to share this. And we were all scratching our heads for about an hour on a meeting trying to figure out, is there something we missed? We know that the costs that they received were, for lack of a better term, sandbagged. They were inflated because of some market uncertainties and supply chain problems still. So we know that those costs were unrealistic, but even if you were to reduce them by 25%, they're still too high. So I wanted to update you folks on that. They haven't given up on Cook County yet. I won't let them. So we're talking about some other opportunities, but those 2 sites just don't, for a variety of reasons, just don't seem to make sense for them, at least right now, the way that things are. Any questions about that? Okay. Just wanted to update you as we've been talking, obviously, about these things. Okay. Single-family development in Tofty. I met with the Tofty Town Board last week, I believe. There's the property behind the Birch Grove School that we're all familiar with. I have a builder who wants to build single-family homes there and potentially a couple of townhomes. And so I went back to the board to remind them that this is a possibility and to put it back on the radar and ask them essentially how much would they want to sell or need to sell the property for housing development. And so they were very receptive. I've been talking with the chair of the board off and on as well. We're going to come back in January at their meeting and discuss an actual purchase price. It's about 27 acres behind the school. Half of that has to maintain as vacant or green space per the zoning. So there are different creative ways to do that. We've looked at some designs to take advantage of that or to make sure that that's followed. I suspect it would be somewhere between 10 and 20 homes. It just depends on phasing. As you all know by now, one of the biggest challenges is the infrastructure for sewer and water outside of city limits, and building a system that's big enough to serve all the homes, and how many homes does it need to be to make it financially make sense. So that's being worked on, but of course, like every other project, we first have to make sure that the property is going to be available before we can start doing that math and making, they can spend the money on that. My hope is, in my conversation with the builder, to be obviously open with the board, is that whatever the cost of that property is, that's something that the HRA, go ahead. I didn't want to, that's something that the HRA is able to acquire and then absorb those costs in exchange for a number of the lots being made available for more starter home. So sub 200, and my target is sub $280,000 homes. And they would be at least 2-bed, 1.5 bath with an attached garage is the goal. That's what we're looking at. So the land, access to it, and then providing it at no cost is one of the tools we can use. Because as you know, land is difficult to find here. And what the board and others have made clear as I've been talking throughout the community, and I met with West End Connect, We Connect, another group that's been revived. I guess they were around a few years ago. What has been made clear to me is that there have been a number of developers who have come in and bought property and maybe parceled it off into 5 or 2 or 10 acre parcels and run maybe electric to it. And a lot of those have been, maybe they were purchased and they're vacant. So the folks in Schroeder and Tofty told me about that, that they just want to make sure that that's not going to be, that doesn't happen, that we don't get another, subdivide and parcel, plat out another project and they just kind of sit. Which is why for both that property in Tofty and then the school board property, I'm trying to get interest from developers to commit to X number of homes to justify the infrastructure. And then, we can grow from there. So I just want to let you know that in January, which is fast upon us, which is incredible, I will be meeting with the board again to talk about that purchase price. And then I will come back to the board and let you know this is what they've said and then whether or not we think it's reasonable and how we would go about doing that. And then if we can find a way to make that work, the builder's going to come with me to the February board meeting to lay out a site plan they're working on for the board to bring them along and get some feedback, and then we would take it from there. Their objective would be to line this up for a spring or early summer start. Any questions?
Good work.
Okay, this one will be shorter, I promise. Minnesota Power, they have 40 acres on Kramer Road. I've been working with my colleague, I just saw him again today at IRRR, Eric Forsman of Minnesota Power, and they have approval to dispose of that property. Again, it's 40 acres on the north side of Kramer Road. It's the closest parcel they own that I could find to 61. As you go further out, they have a lot of land. Elite owns a lot of property there. But the further you go out, the more remote it feels, the less accessible, away from services, amenities, et cetera. So this is probably the furthest I'd want to go for a multifamily development, at least to start and see how the market takes it.
Where is it on the Kramer Road?
So if you go, it's about, I'm trying to think of, do you know where the Ash flyby, that's on the south side of the road? So you know where the pavement turns into gravel? It's probably a quarter mile past that point.
Okay,
on
that's
the
good.
right.
That's not too far.
It's not too far.
Yep.
When you know that it's there and you drive back in, it's like, oh, it's a quick drive back to
Yeah.
the highway.
Yeah.
So that's in conversation. Minnesota Power's having the internal, he just texted me today, they're looking, the accountant's trying to figure out how much they have to charge for it. Because they got it as a part of a large assemblage from, I think, from a paper mill or from a logging, some sort of timber transaction. And so they're trying to figure out, okay, of that huge, multi-parcel sale, how much would we ascribe to this 40 acres? They don't necessarily need to make any money on it, but because they are dedicated and beholden to their shareholders, so they want to make sure that they're not losing money is where they're at. So I have no idea what to expect for that price, and obviously if it doesn't make any sense, then it doesn't make any sense. But they have an interest in helping the community, and the community in Schroeder wants to see housing there too. So, okay. Vest Unchained. I'm not going to give any specific details because I would get them wrong, and Commissioner Skill can get them right. The reason I put it on the agenda is just that obviously this is Commissioner Skildom's last, his last meeting with us, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's a wonderful project that he and his company are working on, and my hope is to be able to support him in it and advocate for the project and help with technical assistance or whatever, because it's housing and we need housing, and he's already far down the path. And I suspect that there are going to be down the road some things that we might be able to assist with, and we're working some of those things out, but I wanted to put on the board's radar that that's something that you might see come before you in the future. So any questions about that? Commissioner, any questions
I
about
don't
that?
have any questions.
No question about that project? Okay. Okay, city property update. Some of you were watching or heard, there was wonderful support from the community at the council meeting. I was very, very gratified for that. There was a hiccup in communication about documentation that was required. So it is now going to be on the council meeting on January 11th. Their attorney is working on deeds right now. And in fact, I think in my inbox, I've been traveling all day, but in my inbox, I think I have a draft of the new resolution. So I'm going to look at that tonight. I anticipate I'm trying to meet with the two new city councilors that were elected, so that I can introduce myself and bring them up to speed on the spirit of this project. But barring any significant concerns from the new councilors, the council as it is now seems supportive, didn't have any concerns or questions. So I anticipate that moving forward in January, which ties into the next update. This morning at about 11:45, IRRR board approved and passed the $500,000 grant application we put in. So we have $500,000 for infrastructure for that property project.
Fantastic.
Yeah. One step down, about 30 more to go, but it's a great stride forward. Yeah, so that's the IRRR funding update. Yeah. And also, the EDA's North Shore Waste project was also approved for their funding. So Cook
Good
County
day
got
for
about
Cook County.
just shy of $1 million in one day for Cook County, which is fantastic. Any questions about the city property update or IRRR?
Yeah, regarding the IRRR, how was the application able to be submitted without, like a signed development agreement with the city?
Between who? Between us and the city?
Yeah, between us and IRRR, without having the property yet or the signed development agreement with the city of Grand Marais.
Yeah. So the IRRR likes to have development agreements, of course.
Yeah.
But we sent them the minutes and the motions of approval for this, and obviously I've been talking with IRRR and the city council, and they have seen their support for the project,
Yeah.
and they know at this point it's a matter of, we didn't have the paperwork. So of course there's a minute risk that the city could change its mind suddenly. That seems pretty minimal. And so again, while the IRRR had said, we'd like seeing a development agreement, I did also explain it in housing developments. So the development infrastructure program that we applied for, a lot of the time is used for different projects that aren't housing related. And they understand that when we're talking about housing, we don't have a development agreement on this type of project until we have all of the sources and uses tied up. And their funding is just one of several. And so when I explained that, and I had to write as part of the package of the application, explain how we're doing this process, the commissioners were like, oh, okay.
So now, I'm learning here with these questions.
Yeah.
Regarding that, how do you necessarily get all the sources and uses tied up or plugged in without the development agreement? Because the development agreement itself dictates many of the line items in the overall cost.
Depends on the project, Commissioner. Just depends on the funding sources. So,
Sure.
so if you're talking about, for example, a development agreement with a city or a county or whatever, then it depends on who's comfortable being first in and who wants to be last in. And that's really what it comes down to. Like IRRR would rather be last in. Most people would rather be last in.
Everyone would rather be last.
But there are very few entities who are like, no, you know what? We'll take the risk. Go ahead. Go ahead, Chair.
I can also add, none of the dollars will be released
Correct.
until it's a reimbursement basis. So the money is held in place for this project at this time, but until invoices are done for actual work that has happened on the infrastructure, no money will change hands. So
the
that's-
risk is time for them.
Yeah.
And they
It's a
needed-
good faith, it's in good
Correct.
faith that
Correct.
they approve.
And so is there an expiration on that?
on the allocation.
Yeah, is there a sunset on that?
Yes, yes, but it depends on it's situational.
Sure.
Usually it's a year, or,
Yep.
or like, they want you to start the project within 6 months or within the year of the approval of the funds.
Yep.
But it is possible with extenuating circumstances to submit a request for a time extension and get another year.
Extenuating circumstances is our world up here. So,
Exactly.
yeah, that's why I
And
asked.
it is in all development,
Yeah.
it's, you know, the agency, that's why they have that system in place, because they have to extend a lot of grants. They don't love it, but they do it, you
Sure.
know. They'd rather win on every bet they make, but, you know, it's a great, we're so lucky to have that agency in our.
Absolutely. And they were very supportive and glad to hear the project's moving forward. I get what you're getting at. The question is risk and how do they, so to the chair's point, they earmark it, they don't allocate it, or they don't disperse it. And if it came down to it and it looked like, for example, the project wasn't going to happen, I would notify them immediately and then they would redistribute those funds for other projects.
That's another thing with, historically, we have a great working relationship, and we're always been very honest and open and upfront about those kinds of things with them. We've canceled grants when, you know, Tofty had, back in 2015, 16, Tofty had 2 grants for a housing project that wanted to happen on the same property behind Birch Grove School, and when, as soon as I found out that they weren't going to happen, I just wrote to them right away and said, we need to cancel these grants, release the money and let somebody else use it. So, it is a good working relationship.
Yeah, I'm very glad that we have them as a partner. And they're very excited to do things in our community that make a big difference like this, so. Any other questions about IRRR or about the property, the city property?
Yeah, the amount requested, or the amount earmarked, can you rewind and take us through just quickly how you came to that amount, or
Sure.
how it came to be that round number, $500,000?
Yes, 2 reasons, Commissioner. One, that's the most that they would likely fund. So that was a good
They
reason.
tell you.
Fair answer, yeah.
And so that's the primary reason. And the secondary reason is because of eligible costs. So their program, that is for infrastructure, so we have to make sure that, obviously, that there are costs in exceeding that amount. And they also want to see a match by the local partner,
Yep.
or the developer in this case, so it has to be at least 1-to-1. So in other words, the cost in this case had to be at least $1 million for earthwork and infrastructure. Well, they're probably going to be more like 1.5. So the local match was there. So it was dictated by like, oh, are there enough costs? Oh, yes, there's definitely enough costs. Well, and how much do you think would be a reasonable amount? This is probably the most we should ask for. That's all.
Good answer, that makes sense.
Okay. Anything else? These are good questions.
I'm wondering about IRRR and on the South to Village project and timelines there now. Do you know?
I do. Do you want us to speak about that?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I only know a little, so you probably know more than I do at this point.
I don't know, Commissioner, I'm not sure what IRRR's, like where they're at in the process, but they're going to be, from my understanding, they're going to be receiving the money back because I don't know who it was sent to, but I did receive a letter from the developer saying because of cost in the environment, they have to pause the project for 2023, which again, as we were just talking about, is not going to be within the window of time that IRRR would like to see those monies spent because it was awarded last year. So they're going to have to return the funds unless they were to get an extension. But the developer also hasn't committed that they are going to for sure do it in 2024 because it's an unknown.
Still too many unknowns
It's
there.
too many unknowns. So I would suspect both Minnesota Housing with their allocation and IRRR will get their funds back, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, so they can go to other communities and do things, but unfortunately, the project's not moving ahead.
Unless they're able to, unless the developer is able to see the puzzle pieces come together and then request an extension, then, but, so it's, remains to be seen.
I would be very doubtful that he'll not be able to do that will happen. I met with him and we've talked, and I met with some other folks about trying to do that puzzle work. We looked at making the project bigger, about turning it all into housing, removing the retail, about doing garages, not garages, about doing ADUs, a whole bunch of machinations or versions. It's just it's still a small project.
Yeah.
When we're talking about 6 to 12 units, it's really hard to bring the cost per square foot down to a reasonable level. And he just, the developer, Rob, just doesn't feel like he can make it make sense. And I believe those are the kinds of developers that we want. He is, for whatever it's worth to me, he seems like his heart and his intentions are in a really good place trying to do it. And he's very disappointed. I can tell he's very disappointed that this is the route that they're going. It's just the cost. I've talked with a couple of GCs after I got their quotes, so I called them to talk to them about unpacking why the costs are so high. I mean, his bids ranged from, they were originally, I think, 1.6 million, and then the last most affordable one he got was 3 something. So when we're talking about doubling the project costs, it just is not tenable. And he looked at doing condos, but then it's very difficult to get people to build condos because of warranties and condo liability. And plus, that's not the spirit of, I mean, he'd have to sell the condos above 350,000 probably, and that's not the spirit of the workforce housing program. So we looked at all, it's not to say that there isn't a viable path that we didn't see. Just for now, we couldn't find one, and he couldn't find one.
It could come later. If
Yep.
there's some corrections in the market and the interest rates and things like that, then the numbers could come back. But
Yeah, it's both the rates and then the costs for
Yeah.
construction that will have to change, I
Yeah.
suspect. So, yeah. Unfortunate.
very much, yeah. Rob, I was meeting with him for a couple, 2-3 years now, and I haven't spoken to him since this latest development, but I did receive that
Oh, you did?
letter.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good.
So,
Yeah, I don't want to lose hope. I don't want to be too doom and gloom. I just trying to be pragmatic about the likelihood of
right.
that moving forward. It's a wonderful site. I told him that. He knows. Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, indeed. Just a quick note about the strategic plan. I sent the draft out to everybody. There were some great pieces of feedback. I incorporated that. I just want to make sure I put a test link on the website so that you could click strategic plan and it pulls it up. But I want to make sure before I put that elsewhere that we're comfortable that if there was any other issues or changes, otherwise I was going to.
No, that's good.
It's a living document, so to speak. We can revisit it every year, and seriously, like I said in the plan, in earnest, revisit it in 3 years to see if we need to adapt. But for now, I was going to call it good and put it up.
Excellent.
What did I tell
Nice
you?
work.
It was intentionally vague.
Well, no, you said the what and the why makes sense, but the how
Yeah.
Yeah.
is vague. And I said, yeah, because we don't know how yet.
Right.
We'll let you know.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, if you do, please let me know, and I'll happily put it in there. Okay, that's all I had. Any questions about any of that?
Good job, well done.
Likewise, thank you,
Busy
everybody.
month.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
So then, moving on, we have, as Jason has mentioned, we are sad that this is Commissioner Skildom's last meeting with us, but we're grateful for the time that you've spent and for everything that you've shared with us. You brought a lot of value and knowledge, and your frontline experience in building homes has been very good for us to hear, and wish you all the best. Good luck with your projects.
Thank you. I'm not sad. And I don't regret having been a part of this at all either. But I just want everybody to know that even if I'm not sitting in this chair, I can certainly be available as a resource to the HRA. And if there's any questions about the industry specifically, or any additional insight, consultation that you think I might have, I'll be available. Feel free.
Appreciate that.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Others have any comments or things to share with
Yeah,
us?
no, it's been really valuable to have you here. I've learned a lot from you, and I don't know what the process is for replacing it, but I think we ought to do so with an eye to bringing in some of the same skill set and perspective that you had. That was really valuable.
Well, the opening on the board is posted on the county's website, And the county is looking to fill the seat with another person from District 2. So I don't know if there's a deadline. I don't remember. I looked at that announcement. I don't remember if it has a
I
deadline.
think it's open until filled.
Open till filled.
There might be a deadline for that they put on there, like opening, and then they'll just reissue it if it's not filled.
So
That's my
then
recollection.
if there are not applicants from Commissioner District 2, then it will be opened to the rest of the county.
Got it.
And there has been some discussion about reaching back to the folks who applied the first time around and see if there's any interest there, so that's where that's at for
Excellent.
now.
I just want to echo what Chris says. I think your skills that you brought to this board have been very helpful. And I know we as a board decided to get representation across the county, but your skills have been very valuable. And I'm wondering if we don't necessarily want just anybody. I think if we have applicants, that we should be encouraging more people like yourself. to step
Builders
forward.
and people
Yeah.
that understand what it is that we're trying to do, yeah, that's a very good point.
Well, I have to say this, being on this board has been extremely educational for me, and there's kind of, there's a selfish motive in having been a part of this. One is altruistic in getting Jason into this position so we can turn him loose. We need to, turn a pit bull loose on this issue at hand. But the other one is that I'm, my own development projects, seeing how the private sector integrates into public sector, and I've never been really involved in the public sector decision-making. So I just want to reiterate that even though I'm not sitting here, as I continue to develop housing with more down in the west end at the Mink Ranch, we've got some other irons in the fire besides Vesta. Whether they succeed or fail, I'm happy to just share all that experience as completely open source if it helps, accomplish the objective. Because the bottom line is we're trying to achieve housing. So, yeah.
Thank you for that.
And I just really appreciate how frank you've been and honest and direct, because that's what we need to hear. We have all this hope and we have all these dreams, and you help to bring us down to a realistic perspective. And I think between you and Jason's experience, it's created a real magical experience for this board in the first year to have that together. And thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad you're leaving. No,
I'm going to back up here.
I get it.
truly, I'm glad you're leaving because if I had to choose where you've invested your time and energy, it would be building more housing, and you know that. You're leaving, but you will still hear from me, and I will still hear from you, I'm sure.
Right.
And I want to help people like Commissioner Skildum and his company to be like. You're the kind of developers we want in this community, in any community, frankly. People who are invested, who want to do things for the right reason, who want to build housing, need to make money, but want to do the right thing. So to the extent that the HRA can be helpful as you go forward and, try to build things, that we're here, and I'm always available to talk about those things too, to the extent that I can be helpful. So
Sure.
thank you for dipping your toe in the public waters. I get it, it's a little cold. You want to go back to building homes, I totally understand. But your service has been really appreciated. I just, again, to be redundant, but to echo everybody else, having someone with the boots on the ground, backhoes in the dirt experience and doing this.
And doing it here.
Right, and doing it
Yes.
here is really helpful for me because I'm one guy who can say whatever I want. But having somebody say, like, actually, it's really hard to do this or it's really expensive, it's been super valuable. And to learn from you about locally, like sourcing of things and how you go about things and what you've learned has been really instrumental for me figuring out this community. So thank you again for making the time to do this.
You're absolutely welcome.
Good riddance.
And we have you on speed dial.
Yeah.
That's right.
One more just quick note that I forgot for folks. If you know of any ways to get involved with housing groups that are happening. This sparked, I was reviewing the minutes and drafting them. Mary Pats was in the last meeting, and so I have on the website a get involved opportunity, and I have a couple, like the HRA board and the Grand Marais Apartments, and I have one more I think that I put on there. But if you think of any ways that where people could kind of clue in and say, oh, I kind of want to get involved with this issue, I'd love to be able to put that opportunity on the website. Just so if it comes to mind, please feel free to call, text, shoot me an email, and I'll put it up there. But it'd be wonderful to be a funnel for housing energy and be able to direct people to ways to get involved. So that's all.
All right, very good. Well, once again, thank you everyone for what, even though we've not got a shovel in the ground, I feel like we've had a very successful first year. We've come a long way. And we're in the tunnel and we can almost see the light, so.
Unfortunately, it's the shortest day of the year, so it's not going to see much light.
It's all
Dim
right? It's gonna get better from this
That's right.
day
Everything's
forward.
brighter and brighter from here on out.
The
That's
best
right.
is yet to come.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, it's
Jason's been on the road up for hours today. He's
A little squirrely if you can't tell.
No, it was gratifying for me to reread the strategic plan and realize, we're pretty much on track. I mean, it's an ambitious plan, but we're on track. Anyway, it's obviously this contingency is what was the phrase we used before. This unforeseen things that can happen, but I think we're navigating well in a pretty uncertain climate.
I think so.
I was talking, just a quick anecdote, with an attorney about the force majeure clause. If you're familiar with the documents, basically acts of God or things that are out of control. And I think in the last 2 years, that clause just got a lot bigger. And in Cook County, it's an extra clause. Like it's force majeure, and then like Cook County's force majeure clause. It's like, oh, it snowed in June, or like the crazy things that you can't, or there's no sand anywhere, or like whatever the thing might be.
Right, yeah.
It's like a whole page now. So, but I appreciate that, and I agree. I'm despite the force majeures that are plenty, I'm hopeful for the next year. So thank you all for a fast and furious and wonderful first year. Most of 2022. And I'm hopeful to be back with more good news in a couple months.
All right. Excellent. Any other business comments, thoughts? Then motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in
wait.
favor? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
So Mary, Chair, you made the motion?
I did make the
Okay.
motion. I guess.
Chris S. in his final act. Yes, the second of the adjournment motion.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, April, if you're listening, you can turn off the camera. The meeting is adjourned.
I'll go check to make sure she did.
Thank you.
Yes, just a moment, I will check.